The opening explodes in silence as the host's voice cracks. He was never supposed to own that company. Cameras swivel to a gaunt 26-year-old R-man in a threadbare hoodie, trembling in the courtroom. The world sees a dropout. Beneath that is a wound shaped by dismissal. Flashbacks flicker. Professors laughing, scholarship revoked, family dinners where his dreams were met with pity, the night he sold textbooks for server time, and the betrayal of a mentor who promised support then vanished. His sister's voice, sharp with doubt, echoes, "You'll never make it." Now surrounded by reporters, Armand's eyes fix on the ceiling. He whispers to himself, "They don't know what built them," as the anchor murmurs the app everyone uses began in a dorm room on borrowed Wi-Fi. The tension is a held breath before a storm. Time rewinds to the university lab, scholarship revoked, and Armand staring at the worn laptop his mother gave him with a mixture of shame and stubbornness. Professors called him unfocused. Administration wrote him off. He sat through lectures absorbing nothing they valued while dreaming in patterns and functions they could not see. He tethered his phone for internet, hid experimental code in commented layers, and spent nights debugging by fluorescent buzz while others slept. One evening he overheard a visiting executive dismissing grassroots innovation as noise that would fade. That offhand arrogance ignited something. Armand leaned into the empty room and said, "Then I'll make the noise so loud they can't ignore the signal." He began refining ideas not for approval, but to prove the world wrong. The first prototype appeared like a whisper. A crude app linking isolated students to hidden study groups, stitched from obsolete APIS and borrowed modules. 5 classmates signed up, initially amused by the rough interface, then stayed because it eased their loneliness. Word traveled through furtive group chats and sleep-deprived forums. Early interest drew polite investor queries, which evaporated when they saw his lack of pedigree. They suggested he attach recognizable names to legitimize it, implying his presence was a liability. Armand refused, trading bug fixes for server time, bartering value instead of selling control. The tiny user base hardened into a community bound by need, not hype. He realized giants didn't seek permission. They filled gaps that others ignored. Success attracted a smooth-tongued mentor named Malik, who praised Armand's raw talent while proposing an incubator partnership that came wrapped in equity and soft control. Malik leaned in saying, "You need their name to scale, give a little, and you'll get a lot." Armand sensed the maneuver, echoes of past exploitation. He asked for clarity. Malik deflected with charm, promising future reciprocity. The conversation tightened like a noose of courtesy. Armand remembered trading pieces of himself for nothing before and refused. He said, "I'll take no shadows on this stage." Malik's smile stayed polite, but his eyes catalogued the refusal, storing it like a ledger. The offer dissolved, and a quiet tension settled, the first fracture between ambition and co-option. Rejection became the blueprint. Armand sought talent discarded by norms, a UX designer fired for challenging the status quo, a data analyst sidelined for being female in a male-dominated field, coders decried as outsiders. They met in basements and jittery video calls, building software and a collective language of defiance. Their work sessions were fractured by lag and power outages, yet each line of code carried the sting of earlier dismissals. Armand told them, "They gave us their no's, we'll give them a product that doesn't ask permission." They engineered adaptability to slip around censorship, class gatekeeping, and built-in bias. Their coalition was not born from pedigree but from survival, and their shared story became the engine. The app's momentum flickered into the wider world, and with visibility came distortion. A respected industry journalist visited their makeshift workspace, narrating the story of the dropout who built a community, casting Armand in sympathetic light while framing him as an underdog novelty. The article ran with a headline that softened the edges of their struggle, turning the team's defiance into a feel-good tale for readers who would never feel the sting of exclusion. Investors surged again, their smiles calibrated, offering growth advice that smelled like control. Malik resurfaced in polite public forums, applauding from the sidelines while quietly pushing his network to guide Armand's next moves. The team celebrated small user milestones, but Armand felt the ground shift. Exposure brought predators in suits with spreadsheets. He gathered the core and said, "We grew because they didn't own us. Now visibility means they want a piece, not partnership." The first breach arrived disguised as opportunity. A major platform offered integration, promising exponential distribution if Armand's team ceded their core algorithmic flexibility to an opaque optimization layer and accepted a branding partnership that placed their names beneath the platform's logo. Publicly it looked like validation, privately the terms disguised throttling and invisible gatekeeping. The team argued, some wanted the user growth, others feared compromise. Armand remembered the deal Malik had once cloaked in soft warmth and replied, "We built our own path. We won't trade the roof for a gilded window." He crafted a counterproposal. Limited API access, shared visibility, no encapsulation of their adaptive logic. The platform delayed, then returned a softened ultimatum, hinting that refusal would make them invisible in the network's recommendation loops. The tension grew, the choice now between amplified reach and preserved identity. The betrayal came from inside their own orbit. Malik, previously distant, surfaced with an offer to mediate between Armand and the platform, positioning himself as bridge while quietly feeding them selective data about the team's usage patterns and internal debates. He framed his intervention as loyalty, saying, "You need credibility and I can provide access," while nudging the platform toward demanding more control and whispering to Armand that compromise was inevitable. Behind the scenes, Malik had brokered a shadow option, a parallel fork of the app, seeded with their adaptive core but rebranded under a different shell, pitched to influential backers as a safer institutionalized version. The revelation dropped like ice water. Armand confronted Malik, who replied with a practiced calm, "I'm protecting you from being eaten alive." Armand heard the old shape of exploitation and replied, "Protection that rewrites us is theft." The fracture widened, and the audience that once cheered began to murmur. Some early adopters, swayed by headlines and platform whispers, questioned Armand's decisions, seeing refusal as stubbornness instead of preservation. The parallel fork leaked rumors of stability and trusted backing, and downloads crept toward that sanitized version. Armand felt the pressure. Users he had comforted in late-night calls began asking if the original was safe enough or too volatile. He called a live audio town hall, his voice raw. "They want us to trade our edges for their approval. The fork is a mask. If you lose adaptability, you lose the thing that helped you when others turned you away." Some rallied, others drifted. The team doubled down on transparency, releasing a raw roadmap and inviting user feedback, staking their credibility on truth rather than spin. The conflict peaked when the platform quietly throttled the original app's recommendation visibility, funneling new signups toward the fork while citing algorithmic alignment as justification. Traffic metrics dipped. Rumors of instability swelled into whispers of impending collapse. The team scrambled, reverse engineering the throttling signals, and discovered hidden markers tagging their requests as non-preferred. Armand organized a midnight strategy session. Eyes bloodshot, they built a decentralized relay layer that masked origin signatures and restored flow temporarily. In that exhausted hour, Malik reared, offering a public endorsement of the fork while privately suggesting Armand soften his rhetoric to avoid burning bridges. Armand, weary but resolute, answered, "I won't give them a clean grave to bury us in. We'll expose the funnel and let users choose." The twist arrives like a quiet earthquake. Armand receives a private message from a former mentor, Layla, who had publicly disavowed him years ago, claiming she's seen the fork's polished facade and wants to help salvage the original. She offers introductions to deep-pocketed backers and access to a trust fund that could underwrite independent scaling if he agrees to rebrand under her oversight. The team convenes, suspicion staining gratitude. Malik watches from afar, his calm surface barely hiding a ripple. Armand remembers how loyalty had once been a ledger of favors demanded in silence. He meets Layla in a neutral cafe, and she says, "I can give you what you need, but the price is your autonomy." He replies, Aid that rearranges our identity isn't rescue, is reincarnation without consent. The offer collapses, leaving both relief and a new fracture. The unexpected enemy now dresses in the tones of salvation. The rival fork, now whispered about as the stable choice, begins to siphon trust. Its backers, seated by Malik's shadow maneuvering, release a glossy narrative portraying the original as risky idealism. Users begin receiving tailored messaging that questions whether Arman's version can scale without collapsing, while the fork's interface gleams in sponsored spots. The team feels the bleed, metrics show attention shifting, and community forums debate whether adaptability equals chaos. Arman, furious, pulls up the analytics and says to the group, "They're selling certainty by erasing the very mess that made us real." Hannah, the UX designer, counters, "Certainty sells easier than truth. Our edges scare people, but they also save them." He decides to launch a transparent campaign, pulling back the curtain on manipulation, daring the world to choose imperfect agency over polished control. Public pressure and internal distrust collide when Malik escalates, leaking selective internal debates to industry commentators, framing Arman's transparency as leadership indecision. Articles see doubt that the original app's refusal to compromise signals instability rather than integrity. The team fractures. One member urges a temporary alliance with the fork to regain user confidence. Another accuses Malik openly of sabotage. Arman confronts him, asking, "Why poison what we built to sedate them with something they can control?" Malik answers, "Because survival sometimes needs a softer story." Arman refuses the softened narrative, choosing instead to expose the leak in a staged public admission, revealing the manipulation while offering a clear path forward. Ownership uncompromised, consequences understood. The fallout is immediate and chaotic. Some users applaud Arman's candor. Others fear collapse and migrate temporarily to the fork. Investors skid, unsettled by the public drama, while the platform watches the conflict as a case study in control versus authenticity. In the aftermath, the team gathers, raw and ragged, to rebuild trust. Arman initiates a co-creation summit inviting core users into the design process, giving them vetoes on future changes and public access to the roadmap. He says, "They tried to write our story for us, now you write it with us." The summit becomes a fraught but healing exchange, voices once silenced offering critical fixes, and the edges of the app sharpen again, not smoothed, but clarified. Just when the tide seems to turn, a deeper reveal drops. The fork's institutional backers were not neutral. They quietly embedded tracking hooks that siphon behavioral insights and feed them to a shadow analytics engine, selling user segmentation to surveillance advertisers. A whistleblower from the fork's inner circle contacts Hannah, exposing how stability was a veneer for controlled data harvesting. The original app's perceived volatility now looks like the lesser threat. Arman seizes the moment, releasing a comparative transparency report demonstrating the fork's hidden pipelines, and proposing a new decentralized trust protocol that encrypts user metadata by default. The audience shifts again, betrayal bleeds credibility from the polished rival, and the wounded original begins to glow with wary redemption. The aftermath of exposure ripples outward. The world now watches the fight as if it were inevitable. A polished competitor, seeing leverage, quietly reaches out with a proposal cloaked as solidarity, a consortium of small platforms offering to stabilize the original app's infrastructure if Arman agrees to share governance in a coalition council. The offer reads like rescue, but the terms subtly blur decision-making, embedding vetoes masked as checks and balances. The team debates. Some see shelter from storms, others smell the same slow dilution that Malik once promised would be strategic. Arman calls the consortium lead and says, "We're not broken pieces needing glue. We're a force that chose to stay whole." He declines politely but publicly, turning the proposal into a message. Integrity isn't isolation, and dependence dressed as alliances still surrender. The pressure swells internally as the team's cohesion frays under fatigue and external expectation. Hannah, exhausted from the transparency campaign, proposes a modular release, publish parts of the app as independently maintainable components so users can choose stability slices without compromising core adaptability. A heated session erupts. One engineer accuses the plan of fragmenting their identity. Another argues it's the only way to retain users while evolving. Arman listens, fingers steepled, then says, "We built a whole from scorn. Breaking it into safe pieces feels like permission again. But if modularity means giving users agency to pick what hurts less, we build it with their hands, not our fear." They agree to test a pilot, not to hide risk, but to let users shape its evolution. The plan launches with cautious optimism, but old ghosts resurface when the fork's polished backers seed a rumor campaign about fragmentation confusion and feature instability, spinning the modular pivot as a breakdown rather than empowerment. Downloads plateau. Some longtime users accuse Arman of reacting to pressure rather than leading. In a rare quiet afternoon, Arman walks the city streets, overhearing passerby conversations, echoing the narrative. They're splitting themselves. Maybe the original was too messy. He returns, gathers the team, and delivers a simple directive. We're not splitting. We're opening windows. Let them see inside, choose what they carry and own it. Their confusion is not our failure. It's the cost of giving them authorship. The tone resets. The campaign reframes agency as strength. Why? A sudden escalation arrives. Malik leaks a private strategy memo suggesting that the original app's refusal to simplify is harming user growth, framing the modular approach as indecisiveness and implying that true scale demands centralization. The leak lands in influential tech newsletters, and pundits speculate whether Arman has lost his grip. The team feels old wounds open, trust cracks widen. Arman calls Malik publicly into the same arena where he once tried to mediate, and in front of a live-streamed audience says, "You sold stability as salvation, and now call our evolution confusion." The leak was not counsel. It was sabotage. "I didn't build this to fit into your story." Malik composed replies, "Sometimes the story needs editing to survive." Arman answers, "Survival without ownership is erasure." Amid the public clash, an unexpected ally emerges. A former user of the fork, now disillusioned after seeing hidden data harvesting, reaches out with a manifesto-style open letter supporting the original's modular transparency. The letter goes viral in niche communities, turning skepticism into solidarity. It includes a detailed comparative user-led audit showing how choice preserved trust while the fork's centralization eroded it. Arman reads the letter aloud to the team, voice thick, and says, "They thought our fractures would break us. They've become doorways." The team reinvigorates their messaging, combining modular choice with a new badge system that publicly honors users who contributed to shaping features, turning previously perceived weakness into collective authorship. The pressure from public drama had thinned their margins, but a fragile hope appeared when a mid-tier investor reached out, offering a bridge round with a condition, a public endorsement of the modular strategy, and a seat on the advisory panel. The team gathered uneasy. Some saw validation, others smelled a leash. Arman recalled every soft promise that became a chain. He met the investor in a glass cafe and said, "We don't need cover to be seen. We need space to remain ourselves." The investor countered that scale required narratives people could grasp, that ambiguity scared capital. Hana intervened. "Our users survived because we showed them the gears, not because we polished the casing." Arman declined the advisory seat, but accepted a small non-exclusive grant, framing it publicly as fuel, not ownership. The moment reasserted their independence while quieting fear. Momentum returned unevenly. The pilot of modular releases found pockets of enthusiastic users who curated their own stable slices and promoted them in niche communities, but the old noise of skepticism echoed. Fragmentation meant weakness, critics declared. A quiet, unexpected salvo came from a technical blogger who reverse-engineered the fork's tracking pipelines and published a piece praising the original's user-driven customization as resilient design. The article landed like oxygen. The narrative shifted from confused breakup to empowered choice. Arman gathered the team and read excerpts aloud, voice low, then said, They called our edges uncertainty. Now they call them survival tactics. We keep opening those windows. Hannah added, they wanted a single story. We gave them a toolkit. The community's self-made showcases began to ripple, turning critics into curious visitors. The world's largest competitor, sensing that Arman's version was recovering narrative control, launched a subtle offensive, a stealth acquisition pitch for some of the original app's open-source modules, framed as community stewardship. They offered resources to formalize the modular components into a separate foundation, implying that integration would bring legitimacy and protect against future sabotage. The team debated the optics. Accepting could dilute the communal authorship they had fought to preserve. Arman asked why the competitor hadn't offered help when they were vulnerable, and was told, timing aligns with potential. He replied, you didn't want to shore us. You wanted to absorb our language and sanitize it. They declined the foundation offer, releasing a manifesto instead that detailed the origin of each module, its contributors, and a license guaranteeing user co-ownership, pushing back against outside appropriation. The campaign of authorship deepened. Arman launched a live interactive credit and choice feature, spotlighting the users and contributors who had shaped each modular decision. Profiles appeared in-app with short testimonials and badges, some emblazoned with early skepticism turned advocacy. The rival fork retaliated with a polished white paper claiming streamlined governance and deriding the original's attribution layer as noise that slows growth. The town halls filled again, some complaining about complexity, others rallying around recognition. Arman addressed the backlash directly in a broadcast saying, they want you to forget that you built this. Our transparency is not friction, it is memory. You gave us the no's. Now we're the yes. The feature became both armor and signal, making authorship visible and unstealable. The tipping point arrived unexpectedly when a major university, whose students had once been the prototype users, publicly endorsed the original app's transparent authorship model, integrating it into their peer support programs. Their dean released a statement praising the way users co-shaped features rather than being passive consumers, a direct rebuke to the fork's centralized efficiency narrative. The endorsement unlocked a wave of student ambassadors, who created localized versions of modular slices, translating the interface and adding culturally specific helpers. Arman, watching a montage of these grassroots recreations, said, we started as voices ignored, now they speak back. The team, exhausted and scarred, felt a quiet vindication. This was not a return to power, it was diffusion, an ecosystem that carried their original fracture as its seed. After months of oscillating fortunes, the world begins to notice the origin story, and the fractures have turned into a fragile brand. A prestigious tech conference invites Arman to speak not as a curiosity, but as a strategist discussing resilient platforms. On stage, he does not recite a polished pitch, he tells the raw story of rejection, betrayal, and a decentralized trust that saved them. The audience leans in when he says they offered him stability in exchange for silence, and he chose transparency instead, because ownership is louder than applause. Behind the scenes, Malik circulates in the hallways with others whispering about how visible conflict can implode credibility. Arman sees him, and instead of confronting him publicly, he closes his talk with the line, they built not to be bought, and then walks off to the backstage where his team waits exhausted and vigilant. The momentum from the conference becomes a double-edged sword. A charismatic venture collective reaches out offering a strategic partnership pitched as amplification of the authorship model. Their representative praises the transparency feature while privately pressing for a seat in the governance layer and a veto on future, risky experiments. The team debates whether accepting would institutionalize their community or entangle it in the same soft co-option that had threatened them before. Hannah argues that the collective could give exposure to the modular ambassadors without rewriting their rights. Arman replies that amplification must not come with strings disguised as safety, and that the collective would have to commit to a lightweight advisory role with no veto authority. They agree to a public collaboration framed as mutual spotlighting while keeping control of evolution. The compromise breathes new life, but exposes cracks. The collective's public endorsement brings a surge of curious users, while whispers emerge that the original app is now aligned with institutional interests, and therefore less grassroots. Some ambassadors feel betrayed and pull back their localized versions, questioning if the core has shifted. Arman holds a closed session and says that alignment did not mean assimilation, and shows transparent logs of the limited advisory input and the covenant forbidding vetoes. He invites the ambassadors to co-sign a reaffirmation pledge that restates their authorship rights and adds a new decentralized feedback channel that surfaces any perceived drift in real time. The gesture calms some doubts while others watch for slippage. The unexpected strike comes from a regulatory body concerned about emerging platforms controlling user data under communal narratives. A terse notice questions whether the decentralized trust protocol complies with new transparency and privacy guidelines and hints at audits that could slow deployment. The team scrambles to prepare documentation. Legal counsel interprets the notice as a test of whether their user co-ownership language inadvertently created liability. Arman convenes a rapid user assembly and explains that the audit is not punishment, but proof that their architecture can withstand scrutiny. He invites volunteer ambassadors to participate publicly, so the process itself becomes a demonstration of their model working openly. The move turns scrutiny into theater of credibility, and the regulators pause, intrigued rather than punitive. The audit unfolds, and instead of exposing weakness, it reveals depth. Independent reviewers find that the decentralized trust protocol not only meets compliance but exceeds expectations because user-held encryption keys prevent opaque data harvesting, and the modular attribution chain preserves provenance. The regulators publicly acknowledge the model as a potential template and invite technical dialogue. The rival fork sponsors watch as the narrative flips again. Their centralized assurances look brittle beside the transparent audit logs that are being shared live. Arman, in a quiet moment, tells the team that the pressure meant to fracture them has forged a structure resilient enough that oversight no longer threatens them, it validates them. The scene closes on the team exhaling collectively as the audit summary scrolls upward on a screen, labeled approved with a cautious spotlight. The climax arrives like tidal pressure breaking a dam. Malik, having lost public credibility, orchestrates a last-ditch exposure of a hidden partnership between the fork's backers and a legacy data conglomerate, releasing internal communications that suggest they plan to absorb user data under the guise of stability insurance. The revelation detonates the polished rival narrative. Arman stands before a global live stream, the weight of years in his voice, and says, "They promised safety while building cages. We offered choice and still stood." The crowd, fractured and wary, feels the emotional pressure shift. Former ambassadors who pulled back return, some hesitantly, others with visible scars of compromise. Malik appears in the background of the feed, silent, his attempt to rewrite history collapsing into confession through leaked threads. The moment is both confrontation and reckoning, the enemy exposed not as a singular villain, but as a system that kept circling for control. The public confrontation cascades into a rapid unraveling of old alliances and surprising solidarities. Regulators who once questioned their model now publicly commend the exposure, citing it as proof that transparency can unmask coercive consolidation. Consortium and the venture collective distance themselves, their guarded language betraying fear of being tarred by association. A coalition of former fork users and modular ambassadors organizes a symbolic digital march, flooding feeds with testimonies of regained agency. Arman, exhausted and wary, addresses the shared space and says, "This is what happens when the pressure that tried to crush truth bends into light. We were fractured, but the fractures made room for everyone to see." The movement feels like a reversal of power, an unexpected alliance born from rupture. The resolution phase settles in, complicated, and not entirely peaceful. The original app, now under pressure and scrutiny, is offered a governance truce by a coalition of users, regulators, and independent technologists. A federated council that codifies the authorship rights, a public ledger of contributions, and an enforced non-predatory clause, preventing hostile forks from co-opting their code. Arman agrees but insists that the covenant include a clause for intentional forgetting, giving users the power to redact harmful history while preserving collective memory. He says, "We survived being defined by rejection. Now we define how we are remembered." The council forms in a tense session, breathing a cautious collective relief, the structure both a shield and a promise. The fallout from the reveal finally closes the loop on the emotional arc. Malik, exposed and isolated, vanishes from public view. In private, he reaches out to Arman with a hollow apology that mentions lessons learned while trying to attach himself as advisor to the new council. Arman refuses gently but firmly, acknowledging the past pain and offering a single condition. Malik must publicly dismantle the Fork's sanitized narrative and fund a trust for overlooked creators harmed by the prior manipulation. Malik accepts the terms with a tremor of sincerity, and the act becomes a bitter reconciliation, not forgiveness but accountability. The audience hears the news, and the story that began with betrayal now includes a flawed, uneasy closure that tastes like survival, not victory. Final 60 seconds tighten the narrative into a haunting echo. The app, once a scrappy underdog, now runs across millions of devices, its codebase a mosaic of voices that shaped it. Arman stands alone in the same courtroom from the beginning, not as a defendant but as a quiet observer, watching a documentary about the journey play on a small screen. A reporter asks, "Will you ever stop fighting?" He replies, "No one owns the fracture. They only live inside it. It is the space where truth breathes." The camera pulls back, revealing the building's name etched faintly, a subtle reminder that the system that tried to contain him still uses his platform, yet his name is nowhere in the corporate halls. The last image is of a user in a distant village tapping the app, the logo glinting in dawnlight, carrying the shard of that original defiant voice.